She parked her car directly across my driveway, not slightly over the line, completely blocking it. I had just inherited the house from my aunt. Before I could even step inside, a woman appeared, clipboard in hand, looking at me like I was trespassing on her property. "You can't park here. This is an HOA community." I pointed at the house behind me. "This is my house." She smiled. "That was Louise's house. And I don't know who you are." She didn't know who I was. That was her first mistake. She also didn't know what I did for a living. That was her last mistake. Because I'm the county sheriff. And that car she so proudly parked across my driveway, I'm the one who signed the order to tow it away. If you've ever dealt with someone who thinks their clipboard is the law, stay with me. Drop a comment where you're watching from. This one's for you. The house looked exactly like I remembered. 2 stories of weathered clapboard, a wraparound porch with peeling paint, and a chimney leaning slightly left since before I was born. Aunt Louise's place sat at the end of Maple Drive, surrounded by identical beige homes that looked stamped from a factory. Her house was the only one that didn't match, built in 1952, back when this was farmland and the nearest neighbor was a mile away. Now it was an island of character in a sea of conformity. I pulled my truck to a stop and sat there, just looking. The last time I'd visited was 3 years ago, Thanksgiving. Louise made her famous apple pie and told stories about my mother until we both cried. She hugged me at the door and said, "Don't be a stranger, Marcus." I'd meant to come back sooner. Work got in the way, life got in the way. Now she was gone, and I was here to claim an inheritance I never wanted because I'd rather have her back. That's when I noticed the SUV. A white Cadillac Escalade, spotless, was parked dead center across my driveway, not at an angle perfectly positioned, so I couldn't get through. I checked the plate out of habit. 20 years in law enforcement does that. Vanity plate, HOA Pres. I almost laughed. Instead, I stepped out of my truck into the crisp October air. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked twice and went silent. I walked toward the Escalade, and that's when she appeared. She came out of the house next door like she'd been waiting. Mid-50s, blonde hair in a tight ponytail, cream cardigan, pressed slacks, carrying a clipboard because, of course, she was. She stopped at the edge of her lawn and crossed her arms. "Can I help you?" The tone made clear she had no intention of helping. I pointed at the Escalade. "Is this your vehicle?" She glanced at it like noticing it for the first time. "Yes." "Is there a problem?" I kept my voice neutral, the same tone I used during traffic stops. "It's blocking my driveway." She tilted her head, studying me. "Your driveway. That's Louise Whitmore's house. Louise passed away 3 weeks ago. If you've ever had someone look at you like you don't belong in your own life, you know what I felt? The dismissal, the assumption you're lying until proven otherwise. I've dealt with it throughout my career. Suspects who think badges are costumes. Lawyers who think they're smarter than everyone, but it cuts differently in your personal life. You're not wearing professional armor. You're just a man trying to reach the house his aunt left him. I'm Marcus Cole. Louise was my aunt. I inherited the property." Her expression flickered surprise, then calculation. "Oh, I didn't know Louise had family." That was a lie. Louise had photos of me on her mantle. Anyone inside her house would have seen them. "She had me," I said, "for 40 years. The woman extended her hand without apologizing, without offering condolences. "Brenda Holloway, president of the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association. Louise and I were neighbors." The pause told me everything about their relationship. I shook briefly. "Nice to meet you. Would you mind moving your car?" She smiled, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "I'll move it when I'm ready, but while I have you, we should discuss compliance issues. The exterior paint is non-conforming. The fence exceeds height regulations. The lawn hasn't been maintained to community standards." I stared at her. "My aunt died 3 weeks ago. The lawn hasn't been my priority." She nodded as she understood, but her eyes said otherwise. "Standards are standards, Mr. Cole. One non-compliant home affects everyone." You're probably wondering why I didn't tell her who I was right there. Why didn't I mention I'm the sheriff of Madison County, one jurisdiction over, and watch her face change? Simple answer: you learn more about people when they think you have no power. And Brenda Holloway thought I was nobody who'd wandered into her territory. "I understand," I said. "Now, please move your car." She held my gaze, then shrugged. "I'll get to it." She turned and walked away without looking back. I waited 15 minutes. The Escalade didn't move, so I parked on the street, walked past the SUV, up the creaking porch steps, and through the front door. The smell hit me first. Lavender, old books, something faintly sweet like vanilla, Louise's smell. The living room was exactly as I remembered: overstuffed armchair, crocheted blankets, shelves of paperback romances, and family photos. I picked up a picture from the mantel, me at 12, holding a vase from the pond out back, Louise beaming beside me. That was the summer my parents divorced. I'd spent 3 months here, and she'd made sure I knew I always had a home. Then I found the box, in her bedroom closet, behind winter coats, a cardboard file box filled with papers. I carried it to the kitchen table and started reading. Letters, dozens of them, all from the Maplewood Estates HOA, violation notices for paint color, fines for unapproved landscaping, warnings about fence height, mailbox style, and holiday decorations. Some dated back 15 years. The amounts added up to thousands of dollars. At the bottom, a letter from a lawyer dated 2015, explaining the property was grandfathered, not subject to HOA jurisdiction. Louise had known, all along. She'd known they had no authority over her, but she'd never fought back, never shown them this letter, just quietly paid the fines and endured the harassment. I sat at her kitchen table, holding that lawyer's letter, looking out the window. The white Escalade was still there. Through her kitchen window, Brenda Holloway was on the phone, laughing at something. "How long did you let them do this to you?" I asked the empty room. No answer. But staring at that box full of 15 years of harassment, I knew exactly what I was going to do about it. The next morning, I found the envelope in the mailbox, white, official-looking. Maplewood Estates HOA Office of Compliance is printed in the corner. I opened it standing in the driveway, coffee in hand, and read the contents twice. Violation notice, in bold red at the top. The offense: unregistered vehicle parked on property without HOA approval. The fine $200, due within 14 days. At the bottom, failure to pay may result in lien placement. No signature, no phone number, just a P.O. box for payments. I looked at my truck parked in my own driveway. On property I legally owned, they were fining me for existing. I went inside and pulled out Louise's document box. Spent an hour confirming what I already suspected. The original deed from 1952, property tax records showing continuous ownership, and the lawyer's letter from 2015 explaining the legal reality: this house predates the HOA by 46 years. They have no jurisdiction here, no right to fine, no authority to enforce, no power whatsoever. Louise had known. She'd had proof in her hands for 8 years, but the notices kept coming, and she kept paying. That was Louise. She'd rather lose money than lose peace. I loved her for it, but I'm not her. That afternoon, I walked next door with the violation notice in my hand. Brenda answered on the second knock. Same cardigan, same clipboard. She looked at me like I was an expected inconvenience. "Mr. Cole, what can I do for you?" I held up the paper. "A fine for parking my vehicle on my own property." She nodded. "All vehicles must be registered with the HOA. It's in the bylaws." I kept my voice even. "This house isn't part of the HOA. It's a grandfathered property. I have documentation." Something flickered in her eyes, recognition, annoyance, but she recovered fast. "I don't care what old paperwork says. You live in this community. You benefit from our standards, our property values. The least you can do is follow the rules." I held up the notice again. "This is a fraudulent demand for payment. You have no legal authority to fine me." Her smile went cold. "Be careful how you speak to me. Mr. Cole, I've run this community for 12 years. I know everyone on the board, everyone at the county office, everyone who matters." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I can make your life here very uncomfortable." I didn't step back. "I'm sure you can try." She laughed short, dismissive. "Your aunt tried to fight me once, years ago, sent some lawyer letter, thought that would change things." She tilted her head, studying me. "You know what changed? Nothing. She still got the notices. She still paid. Because that's what people do when they realize fighting is more exhausting than compliance." She smiled wider. "You'll learn the same thing." There it was, Confirmation that she'd known all along, known Louise had legal protection, known the fines were baseless, sent them anyway for 15 years. This wasn't ignorance, it was a strategy. Wear people down, make compliance easier than resistance. Bank on the fact that most people won't fight back. Louise hadn't. Brenda was betting I wouldn't either. I won't be paying this fine, I said, and I'd suggest you stop sending them. She shrugged, like I'd told her the weather forecast. We'll see about that, Mr. Cole. People always say they'll fight. They never do. She stepped back and closed the door in my face. I walked back to my house and stood in the kitchen, looking at the violation notice, tore it in half, dropped it in the trash. Through the window, Brenda's Escalade sat in the same spot, still blocking part of my driveway, and hadn't moved since yesterday. A small thing, maybe. But small things are how people like her establish control, park where they want, send fines they can't enforce, wait for you to accept it as normal. You're thinking I should have told her right there. I showed my badge, watched her face change, and ended this in 30 seconds. But badges aren't magic wands, they're responsibilities. And Brenda hadn't crossed a legal line yet, just a moral one. I needed her to keep pushing, to do something that couldn't be explained away with a clipboard and a smile. People like her always do. You just have to be patient enough to let them. That evening, I drove to the hardware store and bought 3 security cameras. Basic ones, motion activated, night vision, cloud backup. I mounted one at the front gate, one on the garage, and one covering the driveway. If Brenda wanted to keep playing games, I wanted every move recorded. Every violation is documented. Every piece of evidence was preserved for when it mattered. I finished the last installation as the sun went down. Tested the feeds on my phone, clear images from all 3 angles. Brenda's Escalade was visible in the corner of the frame, still sitting exactly where she'd left it. I watched the live feed for a moment, then put my phone away. She thought she knew how this worked, thought she'd outlast me the way she'd outlasted Louise. But Louise wasn't building a case. Louise was trying to survive. I wasn't trying to survive. I was waiting for Brenda to hand me everything I needed to finish this properly. The cameras were recording. The documentation was starting. All I needed now was patience and for Brenda to keep being exactly who she was. I noticed it 3 days later. A woman walking her dog crossed to the other side of the street when she saw me. A man washing his car turned his back as I drove past. Nobody waved. Nobody made eye contact. In a neighborhood where Aunt Louise had lived for 40 years, I'd become invisible overnight. The only person who didn't avoid me was Tom Braddock, late 70s. White beard, porch full of wind chimes at the far end of Maple Drive. On the 4th morning, he was standing at the edge of my driveway. "You're Louise's nephew," he said, not a question. "And you're the only person who will talk to me." He laughed dryly. "That's because I'm too old to care what Brenda thinks. Come, have coffee. There are things you should know." His kitchen smelled like pipe tobacco and instant coffee. He poured 2 cups and sat across from me. Louise was my friend, 40 years on this street. When Brenda took over the HOA 12 years ago, she made it her mission to force Louise into compliance. Violation notices every month, fines she couldn't afford. Rumors at board meetings that Louise was senile, letting the property decay. He paused. "Your aunt died with $12,000 in HOA fees paid to people who had no legal right to collect a dime. $12,000 she could have used for her medication." He shook his head. Brenda knew the house was grandfathered, knew she had no authority. She didn't care. Tom leaned forward. "There's something else. Brenda's telling people you're not really Louise's nephew, that you forged the inheritance papers. Posted it in the community group 2 days ago." He handed me his phone. The post was under Brenda's smiling profile picture, "Community Alert. The individual claiming to have inherited Louise Whitmore's property has not provided verified documentation. Until his claims are authenticated, please exercise caution." 43 likes, 27 comments agree. Not a single person is asking for evidence. I handed the phone back. Through Tom's window, I could see Louise's roof above the trees. I remembered one summer when I was 12, sitting on her porch, eating watermelon, spitting seeds into the garden while she laughed. She'd made that house feel like the safest place in the world. Now Brenda was turning her memory into a cautionary tale about strangers. "Why tell me this?" I asked. Tom finished his coffee. "Because Louise deserved better. Brenda's done this to 3 others before you. 2 sold and left. One fought back and lost everything in legal fees. He met my eyes. I'm too old to fight her. You're not. And something tells me you won't run. I shook his hand. Thank you, Tom. He held my grip. Don't thank me yet. Whatever you're planning, be ready. She's going to escalate. I nodded. I'm counting on it. Back at the house, I sat at Louise's kitchen table and opened my laptop, created a folder. Maplewood documentation, started organizing the deed, the lawyer's letter, screenshots of Brenda's defamatory post, and camera footage timestamps. Every violation notice from the box, every lie she'd told. Then I pulled out a legal pad and made a list harassment violation notices to exempt property 15 years. Defamation, public accusation of fraud without evidence. Ongoing trespass vehicle blocking private driveway. 3 categories, 3 potential charges. All I needed was enough rope for Brenda to hang herself. I looked out the window. Her Escalade sat in its usual spot, still blocking my access. The cameras were recording, the file was growing, and Brenda, according to Tom, was just getting started. Good. So was I. The next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office in Madison, not my jurisdiction, but the one that covered Maplewood Estates. The building was a squat brick structure from the 1960s, all fluorescent lights and linoleum floors that squeaked under my boots. I'd been in 100 buildings like it over my career. They all smelled the same paper, dust, and the particular staleness of government bureaucracy. The woman behind the counter had gray hair pulled back in a bun and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked up when I approached. Help you. I gave her Louise's address and asked for copies of the original property deed, the subdivision plat map, and the HOA incorporation documents. She typed slowly, squinting at her screen. That property on Maple Drive, the old Whitmore place. I nodded. She kept typing for another minute, then printed 3 pages and slid them across the counter. Deed recorded 1952, subdivision plat filed in 1997, HOA incorporated 1998. She tapped the papers with one finger. Property predates the subdivision by 45 years. It's not included in the plat boundaries. She looked at me over her glasses. You're the nephew, right? Heard about Louise's passing? She was a nice lady. I thanked her and paid the copy fees. 3 documents, 3 pieces of official confirmation that Brenda Holloway had been operating on borrowed authority for over a decade. From the clerk's office, I drove to the county assessor to pull tax records. Same story, Louise's property had its own parcel number, separate from the Maplewood Estates subdivision. She'd been paying county taxes directly, not through any HOA assessment. Then I stopped at the recorder's office and requested any liens or encumbrances on the property. Nothing. No HOA liens despite 15 years of supposed violations. Either Brenda had never actually filed them, or she'd known all along they wouldn't hold up to scrutiny. I suspected the latter. The fines were never about legal enforcement. They were about pressure, about making Louise feel trapped until she paid just to make it stop. Back at the house, I spread everything across the kitchen table. Deed, plat map, tax records, incorporation documents, the lawyer's letter from 2015, violation notices going back to 2008. I photographed each document with my phone, uploaded it to cloud storage, and printed backup copies for a physical file. Then I did something that almost cost me. I called the HOA management company. The number was on one of the violation notices. A receptionist answered on the 3rd ring, voice bright and professional. Maplewood Estates, HOA, how can I help you? I gave her the property address and asked for a copy of the CC&Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that govern HOA member properties. She put me on hold. Muzak played for 2 minutes. When she came back, her voice had changed, puzzled, slightly confused. Sir, I'm not finding that address in our system. I waited. She typed some more. Actually, I don't show that property as part of our association at all. Are you sure you have the right HOA? I almost said it. Almost said. I know. That's why I'm calling to confirm. But I caught myself. If I revealed that I already knew the property was exempt, she might mention it to Brenda, might give her time to prepare a response, craft a new narrative. So, instead I just said, must be a mistake on my end. Thank you for checking. I hung up and sat there for a moment, feeling the weight of what I'd almost done. 20 years of interrogations, interviews, and witness statements, and I'd nearly tipped my hand to a receptionist over the phone. That's the thing about working a personal case. You get sloppy. You let emotion override training. In my jurisdiction, I'd never make that mistake. But this wasn't my jurisdiction. This was my aunt's house, my family's legacy, and a woman who had made Louise's final years miserable. I needed to be more careful. Brenda wasn't a suspect in a criminal investigation, not yet. She was a neighbor with connections, a community that believed her, and no idea that she was being documented by someone who knew exactly how to build a case. I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing camera footage, 9 days of recordings. Brenda's Escalade appeared in almost every one parked in the same spot, blocking the same section of my driveway. I logged each instance date, time, duration. Some days she moved it for a few hours, then put it right back. Other days, it sat there from dawn until well past midnight. I also captured footage of her walking past my property line 3 times, once stopping to take photos of my truck with her phone. No trespassing yet. She'd stayed on the sidewalk, but the pattern was clear. Surveillance, documentation of her own. She was building something too. That evening, I organized everything into categories. Official records proving the property was exempt, camera footage proving ongoing harassment, screenshots of her defamatory post, Tom's verbal account of 15 years of abuse. The violation notices themselves, each one a piece of evidence that she'd knowingly sent fraudulent demands to a property outside her jurisdiction. It wasn't a criminal case yet, but it was the skeleton of one, the kind of framework that prosecutors love because it tells a story without needing interpretation. Date follows date, document supports document, pattern becomes proof. I looked at the stack of papers, the laptop screen full of footage thumbnails, and the legal pad with my handwritten notes. This was what I did for a living: build cases, gather evidence, wait for the other side to make a mistake they couldn't take back. The difference was, usually I had a department behind me, a team, resources. Here, I had a kitchen table and a dead woman's file box. But the principles were the same. Document everything, stay patient, let them escalate. Through the window. Brenda's Escalade gleamed under the streetlight. 10th day. She'd moved it once this afternoon. I had watched on my phone while getting coffee in town, then put it right back within 2 hours, testing me, seeing if I'd react. I wasn't going to react. Not yet. But I was going to be ready when she gave me a reason to. I woke to the sound of an engine idling, not passing by stationary, close. The clock on my nightstand read 6:47 a.m. Gray light filtered through the curtains. I pulled them aside and looked out at my driveway. My truck was there, right where I'd parked it, but behind it, blocking any possibility of exit, sat a black Ford F-250 I'd never seen before. Mud-caked tires, tinted windows, no plates visible from my angle. Someone had parked it there while I slept, not on the street, not at the edge of the property, but directly behind my vehicle, inches from my bumper. I couldn't move my truck without pushing theirs into the street. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera feeds, scrolled back through the night footage. There, 3:17 a.m. The pickup rolled slowly up my driveway, headlights off, parking with deliberate precision. The driver's door opened. A figure stepped out, male, baseball cap, face turned away from the camera, and walked down the street toward Brenda's house. No hesitation, no looking around, like he knew exactly where the cameras were and how to avoid them. I got dressed and walked outside. The October morning was cold, my breath visible in the air. The black pickup sat there like an accusation, dew condensing on its hood, and standing at the edge of my property line, right where the sidewalk met my driveway, was Brenda Holloway. She wasn't alone. 3 men stood with her, arms crossed, faces set in the particular expression of people who've been told they're doing something important. I recognized one of them from the community group screenshots. He'd commented, "Should we call the police on Brenda's defamation post? Now he was here, playing enforcer for a woman who'd convinced him I was the enemy?" Brenda smiled when she saw me, that same smile, polished, cold, certain of itself. "Good morning, Mr. Cole. I hope we didn't wake you." I gestured at the pickup. "Whose truck is this?" She tilted her head. "That belongs to Kevin here." She indicated the man I'd recognized. "He's assisting with our community vehicle compliance inspection. Your truck doesn't have an HOA registration sticker. which is a violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our bylaws. I kept my voice level. This property isn't part of the HOA. I've explained this. I have documentation. Kevin stepped forward. Brenda says different. I looked at him, really looked, mid-40s, soft around the middle, wearing a polo shirt with a local insurance company logo, the kind of man who had never questioned authority in his life, because authority had never inconvenienced him. Brenda is wrong, I said, and your truck is parked on private property without the owner's permission. That's trespassing. Brenda laughed. We've contacted a tow service. If you don't move your vehicle to a compliant location within 30 minutes, it will be removed and impounded. I stared at her. My vehicle is parked in my own driveway, on my own land. You have no authority to tow anything. She checked her watch. 29 minutes now. You're watching this and thinking, why doesn't he just tell them, flash the badge, end the standoff, send these people home embarrassed? I understand the impulse. But here's what 20 years of law enforcement teaches you. Revealing power too early solves the immediate problem and creates a bigger one. Brenda would back off. She'd apologize, play the victim, and tell everyone I'd intimidated her with my position. And next month, next year, she'd find someone else. Someone without a badge. Someone who couldn't push back. I didn't want to win this moment. I wanted to end this pattern. For Louise. For Tom. For whoever Brenda would target next if nobody stopped her. So, I waited. Stood on my own porch, arms crossed, watching them watch me. 15 minutes passed. The tow truck appeared at the end of Maple Drive white cab, yellow flatbed, Martinez Towing painted on the door. It pulled up to my driveway and stopped. The driver stepped out, Hispanic, mid-30s, work boots, and a company jacket. He looked at the scene in front of him, 4 people on the sidewalk, me on the porch, 2 vehicles in the driveway. He scratched the back of his neck. Someone called about a tow. Brenda stepped forward. Yes, the red truck is there. It violates community parking regulations and needs to be removed. The driver, Martinez, I assumed, walked closer, looked at my truck, looked at the private property no trespassing sign I'd installed on day 2, looked at the driveway, clearly part of a residential lot, clearly not public space. Ma'am, I can't tow a vehicle from private property without the owner's authorization or a police order. This isn't a public street. Brenda's smile tightened. I'm the president of the Maplewood Estates HOA. I'm authorizing... Martinez held up a hand. HOA doesn't count. This is someone's home. If you want that truck moved, you need the homeowner's permission, or you need to call the cops. He turned toward me and stopped, squinted, took a step closer. Wait a minute, he said slowly. I know you... I didn't respond. He came up the driveway, studying my face. You're Sheriff Cole, Madison County. Behind him, I heard Brenda's sharp intake of breath. Martinez nodded to himself. Yeah, you came to my cousin's shop last year, that stolen car recovery thing. You were really decent about it. He glanced back at Brenda, then at me again. You live here now? The silence that followed was the kind you can feel. Brenda's face had gone pale. Kevin and the other 2 men exchanged glances, the sudden uncertainty of people realizing they might be on the wrong side of something bigger than they understood. I let the moment. Sheriff, Brenda's voice came out smaller than I'd ever heard it. You're a sheriff. I looked at her. Madison County, 1 jurisdiction over. And I watched her process that, watched her recalculate everything she'd done over the past 2 weeks. The fake fines, the defamation post, the truck parked on my property at 3 a.m, the attempted illegal tow, all of it documented, all of it witnessed, and all of it was done to a man who knew exactly how to build a case. Martinez was looking back and forth between us, clearly sensing he had walked into something. So, no tow, then I shook my head. No tow for my truck, but that black pickup behind it, I pointed at Kevin's F-250. That one's been parked on my property without permission since 3 a.m. I'd like it removed. Kevin's face went red. Now, wait you have 5 minutes to move it yourself, I said. Or, Mr. Martinez here can do it for you. Your choice. The silence stretched again. Then Kevin fumbled in his pocket for keys and practically ran to his truck. The engine roared to life. He He reversed out of my driveway fast enough to leave tire marks on the pavement. Brenda watched him go, her composure cracking at the edges. The other two men were already walking away, suddenly very interested in being somewhere else. I turned to Brenda. "We need to talk, but not here, not now." I let my gaze hold hers. "I'd suggest you speak with a lawyer before our next conversation." She didn't respond, just stood there, mouth slightly open, clipboard hanging forgotten at her side. Then she turned and walked back to her house without looking back. Martinez let out a low whistle. "Man, what did she do to you?" I watched Brenda's door close behind her. "Not to me," I said. "To someone who couldn't fight back." 3 days passed after the standoff. Brenda's Escalade disappeared from its usual spot the first time in nearly 2 weeks. Her house stayed dark most evenings. No more violation notices appeared in my mailbox. The community group went quiet. I might have thought she'd given up if I hadn't known better. People like Brenda don't surrender. They retreat, regroup, and find new angles. She was planning something. I could feel it the way you feel a storm building on the horizon, pressure in the air, electricity in the silence. So I kept documenting, kept waiting, and on the morning of the 14th day, she made her move. I was finishing breakfast when I heard the commotion. Voices outside, multiple people, agitated. I walked to the front window and saw a crowd gathering at the edge of my property. 15, maybe 20 people from the neighborhood. Brenda stood at the center, clipboard in hand, speaking with animated gestures. Behind her, parked directly across my driveway in the same spot where this had all started, sat her white Escalade, license plate HOA Prez gleaming in the morning sun. She'd brought witnesses this time, brought an audience. Whatever she was planning, she wanted people to see it. I stepped onto the porch. The crowd went quiet. Brenda turned to face me, and I saw something new in her expression. Desperation masked as confidence. The look of someone who knows they're losing, but hasn't accepted it yet. "Mr. Cole," she called out. Or should I say, Sheriff Cole, "we need to discuss the situation." I walked down the porch steps and stopped at the edge of my driveway. "I'm listening." She gestured at the crowd behind her. "These are concerned residents of Maplewood Estates. We've come to inform you that despite your position, the community has voted to pursue legal action if you don't bring your property into compliance with our standards." I looked at the faces behind her. Some avoided my gaze. Others stared with the particular intensity of people who've been told they're fighting for something righteous. Kevin wasn't among them, apparently. One embarrassment was enough. But there were plenty of others willing to take his place. "What compliance would that be?" I asked. Brenda lifted her clipboard. The exterior paint, the fence height, the landscaping, the unregistered vehicles, all documented violations going back 15 years. She smiled. "We've calculated the outstanding fines at $14,600. We're prepared to file a lien if payment isn't received within 30 days. $14,600, more than Louise had paid in her entire lifetime, and they wanted even more. I felt something cold settle in my chest, not anger, something quieter, resolve. "Mrs. Holloway," I said, keeping my voice level, "I'm going to explain something to you one final time. This property was built in 1952. Your HOA was incorporated in 1998. I have documentation from the county clerk, the assessor's office, and your own management company confirming that this address has never been part of Maplewood Estates." I paused. "Every violation notice you've sent to my aunt, to me, has been fraudulent. Every fine you've collected has been theft. And this crowd you've assembled, they're witnesses to you committing harassment in broad daylight." Murmurs rippled through the group. Someone near the back said, "Is that true?" Someone else shushed them. Brenda's smile flickered, but held. "Documentation can be forged. Anyone can claim, 'I have the original deed,'" I said, "recorded with the county. I have tax records showing separate parcel numbers. I have a letter from the HOA management company stating this property isn't in their system." I took a step forward. "And I have 14 days of video footage showing your vehicle blocking my driveway. Your associates are parking on my property at 3 a.m. Your defamatory posts accusing me of fraud without evidence." Another step. "I also have witness testimony from Tom Braddock documenting 15 years of harassment against my aunt, a woman who paid thousands of dollars she didn't owe because you made her life miserable enough that it seemed easier than fighting." The crowd had gone completely silent. Brenda's face had lost its color. "You asked if I should be called Sheriff Cole," I continued. "Yes, Madison County, 20 years of law enforcement experience, 20 years of building cases exactly like this one." I stopped at 3 feet from her. "You've committed harassment, defamation, fraud, and trespassing, all documented, all witnessed. The only question now is how much worse you want to make it." Brenda opened her mouth, closed it, and opened it again. "You can't. This is a civil matter. You have no jurisdiction here." "You're right," I said. "This isn't my jurisdiction, so I'm not going to arrest you." I pulled out my phone. "I'm going to call the people who can." I dialed a number I knew by heart, not 911, but the direct line to the sheriff's office that covered this county. A friend. Someone I'd worked with on cross-jurisdictional cases for years. I explained the situation briefly: ongoing harassment, documented trespass, and a vehicle blocking a private driveway. I gave the address. Then I hung up and looked at Brenda. "Deputies on the way, 15 minutes. The crowd began to disperse. People who had shown up ready to support Brenda suddenly remembered appointments, errands, and children who needed picking up. Within 5 minutes, only a handful remained, and they were keeping their distance, watching rather than participating. Brenda stood alone in the middle of the street, clipboard clutched to her chest, watching her army abandon her. Deputy Janet Reyes arrived in 12 minutes. She stepped out of her cruiser with the calm efficiency of someone who'd handled 1,000 neighborhood disputes. I'd worked with Janet before. She was thorough, professional, and had no patience for people who wasted her time. She assessed the scene quickly: me on my property, Brenda on the sidewalk, the Escalade blocking my driveway. "Sheriff Cole," she said with a nod. "Ma'am, someone wants to explain what's happening here." I let Brenda speak first. She tried to start talking about HOA violations, community standards, and documentation. Janet listened with her arms crossed, expression neutral. When Brenda finished, Janet turned to me. I handed her my phone with the evidence folder open. She scrolled through it for 2 full minutes without speaking. Then she looked at Brenda. "Ma'am, I'm seeing 14 days of footage showing your vehicle parked across this driveway. I'm seeing a property deed that predates your HOA by almost 50 years. And I'm seeing screenshots of you publicly accusing this man of fraud without any supporting evidence." She handed back my phone. "You need to move your vehicle immediately, and I'd strongly advise you to consult an attorney before having any further contact with Mr. Cole." Janet caught my eye as Brenda fumbled for her keys. The slightest nod, a professional acknowledgement between people who'd seen this pattern before. The bully who built a kingdom on bluster, crumbling when someone finally called their bluff. No satisfaction in her expression, just the quiet recognition that the system, when properly engaged, still worked. Brenda unlocked her Escalade with shaking hands. She climbed in, started the engine, and began to reverse, but she was rattled, moving too fast. Her bumper caught the corner of my mailbox post with a crunch of plastic. She overcorrected, tires squealing, and ended up half on my lawn. Janet held up a hand. "Ma'am, stop the vehicle." Brenda froze. Through her windshield, I could see her face pale, eyes wide, the look of someone watching everything fall apart in real time. Janet walked over to the Escalade, looked at the tire tracks across my grass, and looked at the damaged mailbox post. "You just drove onto private property and damaged personal property in front of a law enforcement officer." She unclipped the radio from her belt. "I'm going to need a tow truck." Brenda started crying, not performance tears, real ones. The kind that comes when you finally realize there's no angle left, no narrative that saves you, no clipboard in the world that can fix what you've done. The tow truck arrived 20 minutes later, same company, same driver, Martinez. He looked at the Escalade, looked at me, and shook his head slowly. "Karma's something else, isn't it?" I watched them hook up the car, watched Brenda sit on the curb with her face in her hands while Janet documented everything, watched the neighbors who'd stayed peer through their windows, finally seeing Brenda Holloway for what she'd always been. The white Escalade license plate Hopres rolled away on the back of the flatbed. I stood in my driveway and watched until it disappeared around the corner. 14 days ago, she'd blocked my entrance and told me she'd move when she was ready. Now her car was being towed by the same driver she'd tried to use against me. That's not revenge. That's just consequences. Finally catching up. The formal charges came 2 weeks later. Deputy Reyes had been thorough documenting not just the incident at my driveway, but the full pattern stretching back 15 years. She'd interviewed Tom Braddock, who provided dates, names, and details he'd remembered from years of watching Brenda operate. She'd pulled records from the HOA management company confirming the property had never been in their system. She'd obtained copies of every violation notice Louise had received, cross-referenced them with my aunt's canceled checks, and built a timeline that showed exactly what Brenda had been doing and for how long. The district attorney reviewed the file and decided there was more than enough. Brenda Holloway was charged with misdemeanor harassment, misdemeanor fraud, and misdemeanor trespassing. Not felonies she wouldn't go to prison, but enough to create a criminal record, enough to matter. The arraignment happened on a Tuesday morning at the county courthouse. I didn't attend, there was no need, and I didn't want my presence to turn it into something bigger than it was. Tom called me afterward with the details. Brenda had shown up with a lawyer-expensive suit, leather briefcase, the kind of attorney you hire when you're finally taking things seriously. She'd pleaded not guilty and been released on her own recognizance. Bail wasn't required for misdemeanors, but the conditions were clear: no contact with me, no coming within 500 feet of my property, no posting anything about me on social media or in community forums. Her lawyer had argued the charges were overreach, that this was fundamentally a civil dispute between neighbors that had gotten out of hand. The judge had looked at the evidence file: 14 days of footage, 15 years of fraudulent notices. The defamatory posts still cached in screenshots, and denied the motion to dismiss without hesitation. 3 months later, Brenda took a plea deal. The prosecutor offered it because trials are expensive, and the evidence was overwhelming enough that fighting would only make things worse for everyone. She pleaded no contest to harassment and fraud. The trespassing charge was dropped in exchange. The sentence: 2 years probation, $2,000 in fines, and 200 hours of community service at a local food bank. She was also required to pay restitution, though calculating that proved complicated. Louise had paid over $12,000 in fake fines across 15 years. Brenda's lawyer argued she couldn't afford full repayment. The court settled on $6,000 to be paid in installments over 24 months. It wasn't everything Louise had lost, but it was acknowledgement, official, documented acknowledgement that what Brenda had done was wrong. That mattered more than the money. The HOA held an emergency board meeting the week after the arraignment. I wasn't there, I wasn't a member, and had no desire to become one, but Tom attended and gave me the summary. The vote was unanimous, 12-0, to remove Brenda as president, not because they'd suddenly developed consciences, but because they were afraid of liability, afraid of association with criminal behavior, afraid that if Brenda could do this to Louise and to me, the HOA itself might face lawsuits from other residents who'd been pressured into paying fees they didn't owe. Brenda didn't even show up to defend herself. Her husband, Gary, came in her place, accepted the decision without argument, and left before the meeting was over. Someone told Tom he'd looked relieved, like a man finally released from something he'd been carrying for years. Tom stopped by the next evening with a bottle of whiskey. We sat on Louise's porch, my porch now, and watched the sun go down. 12 years, he said quietly. 12 years, I watched her run this neighborhood like her personal kingdom, watched her drive out good people, watched her grind down your aunt. He took a sip and stared at the empty house next door. I always told myself there was nothing I could do. One old man against the whole HOA. He looked at me. Turns out I was wrong. I just needed to wait for the right person to show up. The Holloway house went up for sale 6 weeks after the plea deal. I saw the sign on a Saturday morning, white and red, a realtor's smiling face. New listing, in bold letters. Brenda and Gary had already moved out. A moving truck had come on a Wednesday while I was in town getting groceries. By the time I returned, the house was empty, curtains gone, windows dark. Someone said they'd gone to stay with family in another state. Someone else said they'd separated. I didn't know which was true. What mattered was that the house next door, source of 15 years of harassment, would soon belong to someone else. It sold in 3 weeks. The new owners were a young couple with a toddler named Emma. They introduced themselves the day they moved in, brought over a bottle of wine, and asked if I had any tips about the neighborhood. I told them it was quiet. They seemed to like that answer. The community's transformation was predictable. Neighbors who had spent 12 years following Brenda without question suddenly had always been suspicious. Everyone had always thought she went too far. I'd see Kevin, the man whose truck had blocked my driveway at 3 a.m. washing his car or walking his dog, and he'd look away with focused determination. At the grocery store, women who had liked Brenda's defamatory posts now smiled and nodded like we were old friends. I didn't need their apologies. Their sudden friendliness told me everything about what their silence had cost Louise. A month after Brenda moved away, I found an envelope in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 words in shaky handwriting: "I'm sorry." No signature. But I recognized the stationery pale blue with small flowers in the corner. Brenda had used the same kind for her violation notices. I stood in the driveway, holding that paper, thinking about what it meant. An apology without a name costs nothing, requires no accountability, but maybe after everything, the charges, the plea, the humiliation admitting she was wrong was the one thing that actually required courage. I went inside and opened Louise's box of documents. 15 years of harassment stacked in neat piles. Violation notices, fake fines, threats dressed up as community standards. I placed the apology on top and smoothed it flat with my palm. Then I closed the box and put it back in the closet. Some things you keep, not because they change anything, but because they complete the story. Spring came slowly to Maple Drive. The bare trees began to show buds in late March. And by mid-April, the neighborhood had transformed: green lawns, flowering dogwoods, the sound of children playing after school. I'd spent the winter working on Louise's house, my house now, though sometimes I still catch myself thinking of it as hers. I'd replaced the worn shingles, repainted the wraparound porch in the same white she'd always used, fanned-ixed the sagging fence along the back property line. The things that needed updating, I updated. The things that made it feel like her, the crocheted blankets, the wind chimes by the kitchen window, the garden plot where she'd grown tomatoes, those I left exactly as they were. Tom Braddock became a regular visitor. Every Sunday morning, he'd walk down from his end of the street, wind chimes jingling on his porch as he passed, and we'd sit on my front steps with coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. He told me stories about the old days before the subdivision, before the HOA, when this was farmland, and Louise's house was one of only 3 on the whole road. He remembered my grandfather, who had helped build the original porch. He remembered my mother as a little girl, running through fields that were now someone's backyard. Those Sunday mornings became something I looked forward to, a connection to history, a reminder that this place had meaning long before anyone decided it needed to conform to standards. The young couple next door, Sarah and Mike, who had bought the Holloway house, turned out to be good neighbors. Their toddler, Emma, had apparently decided my yard was more interesting than theirs. I'd find her at the edge of my property sometimes, watching birds at Louise's old feeder with the intense concentration only small children can manage. The first time it happened, Sarah came running over, apologizing, scooping Emma up like she expected me to be angry. I told her it was fine. Louise would have loved it. I said, she always wished this street had more children. After that, they stopped apologizing. Sometimes I'd see Emma toddling near the garden while her parents worked in their own yard, and I'd bring her juice and sit with her on the porch steps while she pointed at butterflies. It felt right, like the house was being used the way it was meant to be. I found Louise's journal in May, tucked in the back of her nightstand drawer, behind old reading glasses, a small leather-bound notebook with her handwriting filling page after page. Most of it was ordinary: grocery lists, reminders to call the dentist, notes about tomato plants, but scattered throughout were entries about the neighborhood, about Brenda, about the violation notices and the slow, grinding pressure that had made her final years harder than they should have been. One entry, dated just a few months before she died, made me stop. Sometimes I wonder if I should have fought back. Marcus would have. He's never been afraid of standing up for what's right. But I'm tired, and fighting takes energy I don't have anymore. I just hope whoever gets this house after me has more strength than I did. I closed the journal and sat with it in my lap for a long time. She'd known. She knew she was being taken advantage of, known there was a way to fight back. She'd just been too worn down to do it herself. And she'd hoped, maybe even believed, that someone would come after her who could finish what she couldn't start. I didn't win because of my badge, Brenda didn't even know I had one until it was too late. What beat her was patience, documentation, the willingness to let her keep pushing until she pushed herself over a line she couldn't step back from. Louise had the same rights I did. She just didn't have the energy left to use them. That's the thing about bullies, they count on exhaustion more than fear. And sometimes, the only difference between losing and winning is having enough left in the tank to outlast them. I put the journal back in the drawer and walked out to the porch. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky orange and pink. Tom's wind chimes sang softly in the evening breeze. Down the street, Emma was being carried inside by her father. She waved at me over his shoulder. I waved back. The house stood solid behind me. The porch held steady under my feet. Somewhere in the kitchen, Louise's wind chimes caught a draft and made their soft, familiar sound. "I kept it, Louise," I said quietly. "Just like you hoped." For the first time since I had arrived on Maple Drive, it felt completely like home.